Welcome to the Distinguished Physical Education Podcast. This is Gary Zaharatos. Last week, I was honored to facilitate the first Distinguished Physical Education book study. During our session, we covered several topics detailed in the first two chapters, including equitable practices in PE, alternative contemporary practices that should replace outdated ones, class rules, and how to clearly communicate high expectations for student behavior. I want to thank all of the PE teachers who attended for their engagement, for sharing their expertise with the group, and for being so willing to reflect on their practice. Also, special thanks to Jen Smith, our instructional curriculum specialist, for all of the work she has done to make this book study happen. If you would like information on what a book study could look like in your district, please reach out to me at gary@distinguishedpe.com. My guest today is Peter Rossi. Peter is the physical education teacher at Stedman Elementary School in the Park Hill neighborhood of Denver. He earned his bachelor's degree in journalism from the University of Northern Colorado and worked as a reporter for Law Week Colorado before deciding on a career change. Peter went back to the University of Northern Colorado and earned a master's degree in physical education. Now in his 10th year as a physical education teacher, Coach Rossi has also served as a regional team specialist, responsible for planning and facilitating professional development sessions for other PE teachers in the district. When he's not teaching, Peter enjoys playing golf, working out, traveling, and spending time with his wife and 3 young children. In this conversation, Peter and I talk about peer-to-peer feedback in physical education, the impact that it has on student learning, and the benefits that it can have for a high-quality PE program. We discuss what peer-to-peer feedback strategies look like during an average lesson, and when you might want to try to utilize them in any given unit. We also talk about common challenges that teachers might face when trying to implement peer-to-peer feedback structures with their students. And now I bring you Peter Rossi. Pete, I appreciate you making time to share your expertise today. Today we're going to be talking about what peer-to-peer feedback looks like in PE. So let's start with why you believe it's such an essential part of a high-quality PE program and what some of the key benefits are.
Thanks, Gary. Simply put, I think peer-to-peer feedback can really improve student learning for both the student doing the observing and the student being observed. I think it gives opportunities to collaborate. And I think when students are observing their peers, they can really increase their focus on like the key components of a particular skill, which hopefully will help them master that skill. I think it also just provides an opportunity for students to work together and learn to kind of positively handle corrective feedback, not get too upset and kind of learn from each other.
It sounds like there's so many skills within this strategy of peer-to-peer feedback that students are learning, whether it's social skills like cooperating and communicating with each other, whether it's the ability to do a rigorous skill like analyze a partner's performance and then be able to accept and receive feedback as well. What's the difference between students just working on a physical skill, like in a class that doesn't have peer-to-peer feedback versus one where they are giving each other feedback? Do you notice a difference in skill retention or skill improvement?
Yeah, I think it improves engagement. So they're almost forced to be more focused on the components of the skill they're working on. So rather than just physically practicing the skill and working on it, they're observing their peers and taking notes or doing check marks to determine if they're completing the skill properly, basically, right? So they have the opportunity to physically practice it and to watch their peer and see if they're hitting each of those components. So I think it does improve engagement if you're going to use peer-to-peer feedback.
Yeah, that's something that I've noticed too from not just, the lessons that I've gotten to observe you when you do peer-to-peer feedback, but other teachers all over the district. It really seems that connecting that cognitive component to the physical skill really makes students dig in a little bit deeper. They really start to remember what the skill cues are because they are verbalizing them to their partners and they're hearing their partner give that feedback back to them. And it really does seem to help improve their skill. Like, for example, if a student knows that they want to assess a peer on always stepping with the opposite foot, it seems to me like they're much more likely to do that themselves more consistently too.
Absolutely. And that's similar to what I've seen too. Seeing it and then doing it all combined, I think their engagement is at a higher level when they're using this practice.
Yeah. We also mentioned some social skills that students are taught when they do this process. So I guess the practice of giving and receiving feedback, I mean, that's something that students are going to need to do in the real world outside of PE class. So how do you teach students exactly how to give and receive feedback? Do you model it for them? How do you ensure that it sounds like what you want it to sound like?
So first and foremost, I think having a positive culture in your classroom and making sure you have effective classroom management is a good starting point. I think modeling it for the students and providing them sentence stems also goes a long way.
When you model what you want feedback to look and sound like for students, how do you present that to kids? What are the sentence stems you give them, or how do you model it for kids?
Yeah, so we'll have something written up on the board so they can read the sentence stem and then I can model it. So it can be a strength. So one thing that you are doing properly is, and then because. So you're telling them one thing that they're doing well and then why they're doing it well. And then like in a positive light, telling them that they're kind of a coach and they're helping their peer. And so trying to teach them that corrective feedback isn't a negative, that they're actually coaching and trying to help them improve upon the skill. So one thing I noticed you could improve upon is this because, so something they need to work on and then telling them the why behind it.
That truly is a cognitively rigorous task. So maybe you and I can talk about in just a minute what it looks like for that in early elementary, perhaps how we modify that practice in upper elementary, and then I can try to give some examples of what I see in some secondary classes too. Mm-hmm. So I know that I've seen you do this with K2, and I think that you sometimes just start with what a strength is with some of the younger kids. Is that correct, or do you have a different practice that you like to do these days?
Generally for our younger kiddos, yeah, it can be strengths, it can be one glow they noticed and one grow, things like that.
Let's talk about then what it might look like for some upper elementary before I ask you when during a unit you might do something like this. So when you go up to, like, let's say 3rd through 5th grade, are you moving away from just strengths and then you're getting into growths and next steps? What does that look like?
Yes. So it can be identifying the strengths, but then to build on that, it can be adding coaching tips for improvement. So just using your example of the overhand throw, if they're not getting their arms in the proper slots, it can be identifying that and then, telling the student they really need to stretch the arms and make a T, like giving them a cue to think about.
That's a really good progression. So mostly for, let's say, K2, it's going to sound something like something that you do really well, or a strength that you have is blank. And you might just keep it that way for K2. When it gets to 3-5, now you're going to include an area of growth. So like a next step that students can work on. When I see peer feedback in secondary classes, I see them take it just a little bit further. Sometimes teachers will ask students to like do a full analyzation of the skill. So they'll say something like, one of your strengths is blank, and that strength allows you to do something. So like, for example, one of your strengths is following through when you throw, and that provides you with better accuracy. So they like bring it to that next level. Mm-hmm. And then they'll do the same thing for an area of growth or a next step. So one area of growth that I have for you is to make sure that you really rotate your torso right before you throw and follow through. And that's going to give you a little bit more power on your throws. So doing those two things, adding in the next step and then the what it helps you improve, I think is that extra step of cognitive rigor that I see most secondary students use.
Yeah, and I think that's great. Just them pinpointing how it's going to help. I think that means a lot for the student being observed, because they can really take that in and be like, okay, it's going to help me improve X, Y, or Z. So I think, yeah, that's great.
One advantage that peer-to-peer feedback has is that the objective for each of the lessons can be pretty similar. So what I see most teachers say, maybe in their lesson plan, and we can talk about how you might communicate it to students, but in their lesson plan, it might say something like, students will be able to verbally analyze a peer's performance of blank, and then they'll enter the skill there. And then they'll say using the words strength, growth, next step, and then they'll put all that content vocabulary in there. So if it's an overhand throw or if it's a soccer pass, etc., they'll put whatever appropriate skill cues in there. Let's talk about, though, how we communicate that to students. So in these lessons where you are going to have students giving feedback to their peers, how do you communicate that that's what the two goals are today? You're going to get better at your skill, and you're also going to be able to do what?
So you could say something like, today we're going to continue to work on the overhand throw. We're going to be able to get some good practice in with that. But we're also going to be a coach, and we're going to be helpful towards our peers today. One of your goals today is to provide helpful feedback to your partner. You can also provide your partner with strengths that they're doing well, but you're going to be their coach, and coaches are helpful, right? So your job is going to be to help them improve upon the skill so that they can hopefully get better today.
That sounds exactly like how you would communicate that type of objective in student-friendly language. One of the things that Jen and I talked about in the episode we did on content and language objectives was, this is what it looks like in your lesson plan, but you've got to have a more student-friendly way to communicate it so that students know exactly what the goals are for the day. And you do such a great job of that. I mentioned your name in there because you so often say to your students, we have two goals for today. One is that we're going to get better at this physical skill, and the second one is that we're going to use this type of language to articulate our learning of that skill. So is this the time then that you would provide students with those sentence stems, and how exactly do you use those? I know I've seen you put them on the board before. How do you prompt students to use the language that you want them to use?
Basically, we'll kind of go through the directions of what we're going to be doing for that day. And then I will have the sentence stem on the board, the whiteboard, and I can tell the students that once you're done observing your peer, you can use this sentence stem and this sentence stem to provide them with feedback.
Do you model those for them? Like, do you walk around and say to them, have you told your partner what one of their strengths is, for example?
Yes, I will go around and make sure that it's being done. But before that, it's kind of a whole group. Here's the sentence stems that we're working with today. And then kind of this is the expectation that you're going to be using this language with your partner.
Yeah, and that's so important too, to reinforce those expectations and provide students with sentence stems, and then you, of course, modeling some of that language for them as well, because if you don't give them those expectations and the language that you expect them to use, what do they end up saying to their partners?
You did a good job, something like that, or something general. Often it's not the academic language or the content language that we're working on.
Yeah, if you're not clear on those expectations, I feel like if we're lucky, we get, you did a good job, but most of the time it could be just something negative, right? Like, oh,
Sure.
you're no good at this. And then
Right.
It takes away all of the benefits that the peer-to-peer feedback structure offers, whether that's kind and clear communication or all the various other types of social skills that we mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you two things. So while we're still in the lesson, what is the structure that you have for students giving feedback to each other? I've seen some teachers where they set the activity up and students just do it kind of organically and in the moment. And then I've seen other teachers where they pause the activity and they say, you now have 60 seconds to meet with your partner. Partner one, start by giving a strength, and then partner two, return a strength back to your partner. Which way do you like to do it, and maybe what are the advantages?
Yeah, I'm definitely of the pause team. That's kind of where what I like to do. I like to kind of take a moment and let them have the opportunity to just focus on speaking to each other and using the sentence stem or the academic language that we're working on. So that's like their main focus at the moment. They'll still get the opportunity to keep working on the skill, but it gives them a moment to solely focus on speaking with each other and talking about, what's going well and what can be improved upon.
When you pause the lesson and you say you have 60 seconds or 90 seconds to give your partner feedback, and this is what I want it to sound like, what are you doing? Oftentimes, the teacher's going around and giving the feedback themselves.
Mm-hmm.
In this situation, you're not the one that's going around and saying, hey, you do such a great job of consistently stepping with your opposite foot. What exactly are you saying to students as they are giving feedback to each other?
Yeah, so I try to go around. I can't hit all of the students in that setting, but it's usually picking out students that I know might need some language supports, right? Like knowing my kids and knowing which ones might need a little more prompting. So I'll kind of go to those kids, make sure that they're using the prompts that we talked about, and making sure that they're being kind about it, right? And reinforcing that this is to help each other. This is to improve our skills. If there's something corrective that your partner is offering, it's so they can help you get better. They're not trying to be mean or negative.
What it sounds like to me is you become more of a facilitator when this type of peer-to-peer feedback lesson is happening. You're just going around, and instead of saying, this is the feedback that I would give you, you're prompting students to provide their partners with strengths and next steps.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're doing the analyzing of the skill. It's just kind of nudging and helping them along and giving them the support that they might need.
Another thing that you mentioned was that after students give feedback to each other, they might have an opportunity to continue working on the skill. Is that when you expect students to implement the next step that their partner gave them?
Yeah, so they should have one piece of corrective feedback, right? At least after that conversation. So the expectation is that they're going to start to implement the feedback and then hopefully improve their performance.
And then it sounds like during that time, like during the second half of the class, you can go around and ask students, what feedback did your partner give you, or what next step are you currently working on, something to that effect?
Yeah, so then it's kind of from there going around checking with the students. So what do we need to work on? What feedback was provided by your partner? And just making sure they're on it and that they're continuing to build on the skill.
Generally speaking, how might you close out a lesson like this? You bring students back to their spots. Is there a question that you like to go to close out a lesson on peer-to-peer feedback?
Not necessarily like one specific question every time. We reinforce the goal that, we're trying to help each other out. We're trying to get better. We're trying to improve. So it's talking about that. I do like to ask the kids, what's one thing that your partner helped you with today and why? Like, how did it help you in your performance? And then they can have an opportunity to share out whole group.
You made me think of two other things that I've probably seen you do at certain points, and I've seen other teachers as well. So one would be if it's the first time that students are giving feedback for this school year, I've seen teachers ask a closing question about when giving or receiving feedback might be important in other aspects of their life. Mm-hmm. So we can have students reflect on that. And then the other one, which I think you kind of alluded to in your answer also, was how their partner's feedback helped them grow. And I've seen teachers tie this into self-reflection, where they'll have a rubric that students are going to align themselves to at the very beginning of the lesson, just for something very, very simple. 1 through 4, 1 means I need a lot of assistance. 4 means I can perform this skill consistently, and I could probably even teach it to a peer or something to that effect. Mm-hmm. Everybody's got their own rubric that they like. And then the students can do a self-reflection at the beginning of the lesson, where they think they are on that rubric, and then where they got at the end of the lesson based on the feedback that their partner gave them. Now that we've talked about what peer-to-peer feedback looks like in a given lesson, how do you know when during a unit to do this? I'm assuming that this isn't the first lesson of your basketball unit or your soccer unit. So When do you feel is an appropriate time during a unit to do a peer-to-peer feedback lesson?
It's probably most effective either middle or probably closer towards the end of the unit, once students have had multiple opportunities to practice the skills and learn the concepts. So they've had chances to get more comfortable working on the skills. So for me, I think it's most effective towards the back end of the unit, just in my experience.
Yeah, so maybe early in the unit, students are doing things like describing a particular skill, or maybe you're giving them the opportunity to sequence something to put it in order. They might even have an opportunity at some point in the unit to compare and contrast a current skill with one that they previously learned. And then once they get really familiar with the physical skill, performing it, and being able to articulate the skill cues of it, then it might be time for them to be able to analyze a partner's performance and provide feedback.
Yeah, that for me, in my experience, that's what's worked the best. And like you said, it's building and getting a little more rigorous each lesson.
I think you made a pretty compelling case for why peer-to-peer feedback is an essential part of any high-quality PE program. Maybe we have some folks who are thinking about trying it based on some of the strategies that you shared with them. What could be some potential challenges in implementing peer-to-peer feedback, and how do you think teachers might be able to address them?
With elementary students, a challenge would be making sure that they're going to use kind words to one another and not bring each other down when they're providing feedback. I always try to explicitly teach the students that their peers are just trying to help them improve. They're not being negative. We're trying to help each other. And that's kind of what we work on and focus on. And so I think that is a challenge, but I think if you teach your students that we're all coaching each other up, we're all trying to help each other, and you model it, I think that you can avoid those little negative moments.
What advice would you give to a teacher who is interested in incorporating opportunities for peer-to-peer feedback for their students, but they might feel a little bit nervous or apprehensive about it?
I would say that it's normal to be concerned about potential behaviors. If you let students start to give advice to one another, like that's a normal concern to have. Students might think their partners are being negative, or maybe that they're being mean if they're providing corrective feedback. So I think the main thing is to have really strong classroom management to try to build a positive culture in your classroom. If you do those two things, I think you're going to have more success. My students know that two of my class rules are always be respectful and demonstrate sportsmanship, and I hold them accountable to those. So they know those are rules that need to be followed in class. And I think if you're teaching those concepts, we spend a lot of time on sportsmanship and teamwork at the beginning of the year, teaching it, practicing it. They talk about how a good sport acts, how a bad sport acts, and how a bad sport can make them feel. We talk about not wanting to hurt anyone's feelings, and that's just hit at the beginning of the year. So I think if you take care of those concepts early, you're going to be just fine. But it's normal to be concerned about this.
Yeah, because it's a pretty involved strategy, right? I mean, you're really relinquishing some control of your class and allowing students those opportunities to take over in the feedback that they give to their peers. So yeah, you're totally right. You have to have those strong and effective learning environment structures in place. It's not something that you would want to try to do like in the first week of school or with a group that you might be struggling with perhaps. Mm-hmm. And then like you mentioned earlier, you just have to be very explicit in communicating what you want that feedback to look like and then modeling that feedback for students as well. And I think that if teachers do those things and they just practice one thing at a time, maybe the first time they try it, it's just like we mentioned earlier, having students just say positive things, right? So we're not even worried about next steps. We're not worried about areas of growth. It's just that we're going to complement each other today. And that could be their first step into the world of peer-to-peer feedback with their students.
Yeah, I think starting small is a great piece of advice. Like you said, it could just be one quick compliment. You could even teach what a compliment is, right? In the physical education setting, what that looks and sounds like. So yeah.
I know we touched on this earlier too. I think sharing with students the importance of giving and receiving feedback and all the other places in their lives that they're going to need this skill, whether it's in their classroom or for older students when it's the first job that they have, or if they're going to go off to college. I mean, that's just a skill that they're going to need to be proficient at. And I think it's really powerful that you start teaching that skill to students as early as kindergarten.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, you're getting the wheels turning now, because now I can talk to my students about, hey, I'm provided feedback often. I mean, you've helped me a ton in my practice, providing feedback and useful tips that I can add. This year we all have coaches in the building. Every year, every teacher in our district has a coach. We have to take feedback and implement it. So yeah, you can point to almost any career and they're going to need it in life.
Yeah. When students know the why behind what they're learning, I think they're more likely to get engaged in it and then stay on task throughout the activity.
Yeah. It's amazing when the why clicks in their mind, and then you just kind of see like the engagement of the class. They're like, okay, I understand now why we're doing this. And they seem to be more on it, basically.
Yeah. All right, Pete. So we talked about the benefits of peer-to-peer feedback, why teachers might want to consider adding this into their PE program. We talked about what it looks like throughout the course of an average lesson, starting with how you communicate your objective and the questions that you ask students throughout the lesson, even some ideas on how to close out a lesson, and when you might implement peer-to-peer feedback over the course of a unit. Is there anything else that you would want to share on the topic?
Yeah, I would encourage teachers to definitely try this, and don't get discouraged if it doesn't go the way you want it to. Just keep trying and keep coaching the students and keep working with them. Because I think once they start to figure it out, you're going to see that it's clicking on a different level. They're not just getting it physically, but they're starting to comprehend and understand how to explain the skill, how to identify if someone's doing something incorrectly, and how we can adjust. So I would just, encourage teachers to take some at bats and give it a try, because I do think it's worth it. And I truly believe it can improve student learning.
Pete, I appreciate you taking time to talk about peer-to-peer feedback today. Thank you so much. We'll do it again sometime.
Thanks so much for having me, Gary.